It's Millennial TLDR time. The best way to play an awesome is 6-1-4-4. That's it. That's it, everybody. Strategy complete. What? You don't know what to do? That doesn't mean anything to you? Oh, I guess you're just gonna have to listen to the rest of this talk. Welcome back, fellow Battletech enthusiasts. So have you ever wondered what happens if you just play a mech against itself? Here I've got Awesome 1 and Awesome 2, identical in every way except for different paint jobs. Now, I wanted to run massive computer simulations of every mech against every other mech to try to figure out if I could see advantages and disadvantages of some mechs versus other mechs, and perhaps playing many millions of games to figure it out. It turns out that the strategy makes a big difference, of course. And here I'm going to make an example of something called a Nash Equilibrium game grid. I'm going to have Awesome 1 and Awesome 2, and I'm going to call them as having different strategies. There's the cold, close, the hot, close, cold, distant, and hot, distant as 4 different strategies that each mech could possibly use. Like Awesome 1 can pick any of those 4, and Awesome 2 could pick any of those 4, even the same strategy if it wanted to. And well, then I'm going to, here initially, I'm going to just make up numbers that represent the probability of winning the battle for Awesome 1 and Awesome 2. And the 2 numbers I'm going to write, the first number is for Awesome 1, the percentage chance that it wins, and the second number is for Awesome 2, and the percentage chance that it will win instead. And I will not include ties, so I'm just going to assume one mech beats the other. This is just an example toy problem here, so you understand where we're going. So first, I'm going to say everything where both do the same thing, they have a 50-50 chance. Each one has an exactly even 50-50 chance of winning. But now, what happens when they don't do the same thing? Like, if Awesome 1 chooses to go hot close, and Awesome 2 chooses to go cold close, then Awesome 1 is shooting weapons more often, and maybe it has a slightly higher chance of winning. And neither of them is, you have to, of course, compensate for the chances of, as long as you don't get too hot, you might have some degradation in your aiming, and you might even have a shutdown, who knows what. But as long as you don't get too hot, you get a benefit for running slightly hot. So I'll just say this mystical hot level will have a 70% chance of winning versus a 50% chance normally. And I'm going to say cold distant versus cold close. They both still have a 50-50 chance because one of them is just trying to back off from the other, but the other one's trying to walk up to the other. But otherwise, they're pretty much shooting weapons at the same rate. So I'll just say they both have a 50-50, because if one of them ever gets into melee with the other, then they both are in melee with each other. So neither of them really has an advantage in any way. They have the same tonnage. They're identical mechs. Now I'm going to say hot distance versus cold close. Mech 1 has an advantage, slight hot distant, because it's still shooting weapons more often, even though it's trying to back off at the maximum rate, and the other mech, Awesome 2, is trying to close at the maximum rate. So they're kind of like neck and neck, but still Awesome 1 is shooting more frequently than Awesome 2, so therefore hot distance versus cold close is slightly asymmetric, 60-40, and I'm going to put 40-60 on the other side over there. Now I'm not including it as hot, close, hot distant versus hot close. Hot distant is, I'm going to say there, it's trying to move faster and more than hot close. So maybe it's not quite 70-30, it's going to be 60-40 or something. And I'm going to fill in these other ones here, hot distance versus hot close. I'm going to put it 50-50 just because both are hot. And again, one is trying to back up and the other one's trying to walk forward, but they're both shooting at the same rate. So anyway, when I fill in this grid, this is kind of this toy grid. This isn't the real computer simulation yet. This is just obviously just made up numbers. But you'll see a problem that occurs with strategy. And first we're going to first describe here. So what is the optimal response? If Awesome 1 is choosing the cold close strategy, then what's the best strategy for Awesome 2? It turns out it's look at that second column. It's the 70. So first I'm just going to circle some 50s here, just looking at awesome 1 and its highest chances. And awesome 2's highest chances at the 70, so I'm going to put a little star there. Now let's say awesome 1 chooses hot close. And awesome 2 is going to pick one of these two, either hot close or hot distant. They both have 50s. That's higher than the 30 or the 40, so those two are the optimum strategies there. I'm going to put question marks there because there's 2 of them and not one of them. They're tied. Okay, so what happens if awesome 1 chooses the cold distant strategy? Well, awesome 2 then picks that strategy because it gives it the 60% chance of winning, which is the hot close. And finally, awesome 1 picks hot distant as its strategy. And that's that one there. The awesome 2 will pick the cold distant strategy because it's 60% is higher than its other chances of winning. So there you go. I'm now going to star up the... if awesome 2 were to pick a certain strategy, then awesome 1 would have a best strategy that it could respond with. So I'm going to star those up too. And my goal is to try to find a place where both are starred at the same time, because that's where the game will kind of get stuck, and that's called the Nash Equilibrium. That's called the pure Nash Equilibrium. Now, it turns out there is no place that has both stars, but I did find a place that has 2 question marks, and I'm going to take that as close enough, and for reasons which will come clear later. So I'm going to call that the Nash Equilibrium. And this is a game theory concept unrelated to Battletech, but it applies. And you can see how dumb this game is. It's just an awesome against itself, and it only has these really crude strategies to pick from. Yet it's a complex game just by itself. And what's interesting about this point is that if you're not at this point, you will switch to strategies which get you to this point. If awesome 1 is not doing hot close, then awesome 2 will automatically move to hot close, and once awesome 2 is in hot close, awesome 1 will want to go to hot close too. It turns out there's actually 4 points that you can switch between, and these are the ones I'm circling here. Any of those 4 points is okay as a strategy and will kind of get stuck there. Or you can flip around between any 4 of them. So that's sort of like a mixed equilibrium where you can randomly switch between those 4 points. And even if you know exactly what the opponent is doing, it's still worth it for you to stay in those strategies because the opponent cannot take advantage of it anyway. So that's why it's also the Nash Equilibrium. A Nash Equilibrium is where even if everyone knows what everybody is doing, it's not worth it for anyone to change what they're doing. And that kind of applies even for this really dumb game of awesome against awesome. Now, why that's interesting is because there's basically, I see there as 4 strategy segments for a mech. And that is, there's the heat, the ammo, the range, and the melee. And how heat and ammo are used are as veto factors. If your ammo is too low for like a really bad shot where you have to roll high to hit, or if your heat level is too high for a shot where you have to roll too high to hit, that shot gets vetoed and does not occur. Range is basically how far away you want to stay based on your longest range weapon that still has ammo. And melee is determining whether you prefer punches or kicks and what do you do when you're in melee range. And then basically there's also a concept of a glory shot. That is, if you're in your stalker, you've lost all your center torso armor, and you're going against a battle master, it's also lost all its center torso armor, and you're like really hot on the high scale, you might even blow up, but it's worth it to shoot because the next round, one of you is going down. So, or at the end of this turn, one of you is going down. Just hasn't been determined yet. So you alpha strike and you ghost heat yourself. Why? Because you just need to kill the battle master, and maybe you'll get lucky and maybe you'll make your saving throw on your ammo explosion. Who knows? So that's called a glory shot. If the mechs are just splattered and have lost most of the armor, then it's still worth it to shoot. How heat management works is you basically have some function. You as a player might not know that you have a function, but you might just innately choose to not shoot when your mech is too hot if it's like a really bad shot. And just how hot your mech has to be to make you not take a bad shot where you have to roll a 12 to hit is kind of like your heat management function. So I've made up some seemingly reasonable heat management functions of how hot a mech is for a pilot to choose to not shoot a particular weapon if, based on its heat sinks and how hot the mech currently is, the heat level exceeds a certain level given the probability of hitting based on what the to-hit roll is for that particular situation. And what I've done is I've just made a little table, and then I've named that table a strategy, and I've labeled it like between 1 and 8. So strategy 1 is you have no concern for heat at all, and you just always shoot, even if you ghost heat yourself. Strategy 8 is you never allow there to be any heat. Like you never allow your heat to go above 4, so you never even get a movement penalty under any circumstance. Like if your heat will ever go above that point, you just stop shooting, even if you like the opponent's almost dead and whatnot. So, and in between 1 and 8, I have a variety of other functions that like morphs in between those two extreme strategies. Then I've also done the same thing for ammo management. If ammo for a weapon is below 20, now I consider above 20 ammo to be unlimited ammo. Like normally a game probably only lasts like 10 turns anyway, or maybe even less. However, my simulations go up to 30 turns, but it doesn't matter. I consider 20 to be unlimited ammo. So a mech that has less than 20 ammo for a weapon will ammo manage that weapon and will not, for example, if you have an ammo management strategy of 1, it means you always take a shot if you're in range, no matter what. You have no concern at all for how bad the to-hit roll is. You just always shoot. And strategy 8, which is the most severe, make sure that your to-hit rolls are pretty good. Like if you're, like here I'm actually kind of showing this strategy 8 for ammo. And so if your hit rolls are not good and you've got less than a certain number of shots, you will not take a shot. And down at your last shot, it's like you have got to have like a dead-on hit with no penalties. Maybe even the mech is disabled or something, so you're able to hit it. And you only shoot if the enemy mech is disabled for your last shot. So that's like extreme ammo management. Now for range, I've done something a little simpler. I only have 1 through 5. And I have range strategy 6 means run away. But strategy 1 means get to point blank range and do melee. Strategy 2 means stay close to point blank range, but just outside of range. So like distance of 2 or so. Distance of 3 means the longest short range band of your longest range weapon. So for like a long range missile, that would be like a distance of 7 or so. And then strategy 4 is take the longest range band of your medium range of your longest weapon. So for like a long range missile, that would be 14. And then finally, strategy of 5 is take the longest range just below the cut off and try to stay at that range. So LRM would try to stay at range 21, for example. I don't allow extreme shots, only short, medium, and long, like the original Battletech from when the game was first released. Although it could easily add extreme range shots, and it probably wouldn't change much because the to-hit rate would be so low. And finally, I have a melee strategy. And melee strategy is just 1 through 4, and 5 will be reserved for future use for charging and death from above type attacks, but I haven't implemented those, so I'm going to ignore those. So it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 is a mixed strategy where you kick mechs that are heavier than you, and you punch mechs that are lighter than you. and for reasons which I won't describe here, but basically you want to try to minimize the chances of falling over by missing a kick if you're fighting something that you're likely to win in against anyway. And you punch because you're trying to hit head hits on them. Strategy 2 is the opposite. Basically, kick mechs that are smaller than you, and and punch mechs that are bigger than you. Strategy 3 is to prioritize punches, and strategy 4 is to prioritize kicks. And that doesn't mean you don't punch when you're prioritizing kicks, or you don't kick when you're prioritizing punches, because I have additional rules on top of that, such as you actually have to have all your actuators intact and things like that in order to punch or kick. And I've put some things where if you've used that arm before to shoot that turn, because you have weapons in that arm, then you can't punch with that. And so then, therefore, you would switch from checking your punches out to possibly kicking instead, because you don't do as much damage with one punch as you do with one kick. So the picture you're looking at right now is actually the optimum strategy for playing an awesome. Now I have small, mid-size, and large mechs and vehicles as possible targets. So you have different strategies depending on what your opponent is, or what class of mech or vehicle your opponent is, and you actually end up with slightly different optimum strategies, as you can see here from these tables and how they are different. Now you will notice that now my definition of small, mid, and large is different than like small, medium, heavy, and assault intentionally here. And the reason for that is what I don't want to have is a scenario where you're thinking, oh, I'm playing a grasshopper and I'm going up against, oh, what is that? It's an Ostrock. Is that a heavy or a medium? I don't want that. I instead just want, it's easier to just categorize everything. Is it a really big thing like an Atlas or an Awesome? Is it a really small thing like a Locust or a Jenner? Or is it something kind of in the middle? So everything that's kind of on the big side is large. That is kind of on the heavy end of heavies and assaults would be considered large. On the light end of medium and all light mechs would be small. And everything else is a mid. And for vehicles, it went roughly in order of tonnage, because a 30-ton VTOL is an assault VTOL and a 50-ton hover is an assault hover for vehicles. So it's not really fair, because those are the maximum weights for those weight classes. So it's roughly anything at the size of a K-135 cooling truck or smaller is called a small vehicle. Anything above that, so basically like a Striker or a Hetzer, or those, up to the Manticore is considered a mid vehicle, and LRM and SRM carriers, and up to the Behemoth are considered large vehicles. I chose the SRM and LRM carriers to be large vehicles, not because they're heavy tonnage, but because they have extreme firepower. So they're kind of unusual in that respect. So they kind of play more like a powerful vehicle rather than just kind of like a middle-of-the-road vehicle. Now, if you look at the individual games, if you look at the mech strategy, small mechs, win, lose, tie, basically the Awesome never loses to a small mech, but it did tie. A tie means neither mech destroys the other in 30 turns. And it could be because the small mech has run out of, like a Valkyrie or something, has run out of missiles and then decides to run away. I don't have a border on the game, but a mech that has run out of ammo does try to run to a distance of 99. So that creates a tie. Or somehow both mechs could be destroyed at the same time. It's more likely just one of the mechs ran away. Same thing for vehicles. The Awesome never loses. Even to mid-range vehicles, the Awesome never loses. And even large vehicles, the Awesome only lost twice. And for mid-sized mechs, the Awesome actually lost 4 times. I don't know what those were. It could have been lucky shots, who knows. And then for large mechs, which are mostly the really heavies and the assaults, the Awesome is still totally badass. It's one of the most powerful mechs, which kind of makes sense based on its battle value being high. It's in the 1600 range, but it basically numerically does beat almost everything in the game, except like an Atlas or something, which is I think, what actually beat it in this particular set of battles. Now, this is still a work in progress. And that's why there's so few battles on this particular screenshot. And and it's also not displayed as a beautiful plot. And that's, again, because this is still a work in progress. But it's showing you that there is no clear, well-defined solution for the optimum strategy of a mech, even in the simple case of an awesome playing against itself, because you create this Nash Equilibrium game grid, which happens to not even be having a single well-defined solution, even for those 4 simple strategies that I described before. And here, you can see this is multi-dimensional. We've got 4 different types of strategies: there's heat, ammo, range, and melee. And each one of us multiple values. Heat, I've got 8 values of heat, I've got 8 values of ammo, I've got 5 values of range, not including 6, which is runaway. And I've got 4 different kinds of melee, not including 6, which is avoid melee, and 5, which is do like death from aboves and or charges and things like that. So once I have this all sorted out and the game grid comes together, I will start, or I find a Nash Equilibrium-ish solution for strategies, then I can do a deep dive calculation with millions of games again. That takes many hours to run, so I prefer to kind of experiment with these smaller runs. I've been doing this for some time. In fact, how I got to this point is I noticed that a locust would very frequently beat a stalker. And I was thinking, what the hell? How can a locust beat a stalker? And it turned out the stalker was basically just blowing itself up. So like after 3 or 4 turns, the stalker would die because it ghost heated itself, because it didn't have a good heat management strategy. It picked a poor heat management strategy, and that caused the locust to win, not because the locust did any damage to it, but because the stalker blew itself up. So now, by implementing all these heat management, ammo management, range management, and melee management strategies, it's possible to actually finally do this mass grid simulation properly. That is, to really see what mechs are the best mechs and how you play every mech in the game to its best. As soon as I start getting a little bit better, like, for example, this awesome map here, I'm showing you the strategies. Once I start getting more deeper dive calculations, I will start posting them on YouTube, showing what I believe are the optimum strategies for playing different mechs. And also, depending on what situation the mech is in, like, what are you going up against? Are you going up against a light vehicle or a light mech, or how do you play against an assault mech versus if you're playing against a mid-sized mech? Do you treat your heat better, differently? What do you do exactly? Or some mechs don't care about heat so much, like the locust, but the locust cares a lot about how close it should be to the opponent and how fast it should move and whether or not it should go kick or not, like get into point blank range or not. So these are all part of the range strategy. So every mech has some strategy. Oh, that's also why some mechs are easier to play than others. Like an awesome is easy to master because you don't have much going on. You don't need to manage ammo. And so it's like you just do range and heat and melee. Whereas a stalker is really complicated to master, and also is a thunderbolt because they've got heat issues. A mech that's really easy to play would be like the locust because it effectively has no ammo because it gets so many machine gun shots that you don't care. The LCT-1V, that is. And it also really can't overheat itself, so it doesn't really have any heat management either. You only have range and melee to learn and master if you are playing a locust. So this is why some mechs are harder to learn than others, because they've got a more complex strategy space available to them. Anyway, I will keep you posted with more as I proceed with the calculations. And for those of you who remember Mech Warrior Mercenaries, which came out, I think, a little after Mech Warrior 2. I think it was I don't remember what year it was quite a long time ago. But in the scene where you lose, you basically are crushing beer cans against your head and watching old holo vids. So what fun would computer simulations be if you couldn't see what happened in the battles? So what I do is I create holovids, which are basically ASCII map recaps of the battle. And for the most interesting games, I will make detailed holovids. And for kind of less interesting games, I'll make grainy old or broken holovids, basically depending on how much resolution I put into the replay of the battle. So here's some examples of some grainy old holovids where the asterisks represent smoke coming out of the carcasses of the mech or the vehicle. And a capital M is a big mech, and a small m is a small mech, and a capital T or a capital V are VTOLs and tanks, depending on the sizes, etc. And I have little ASCII drawings of the mech and the vehicle and kind of how much damage they've taken and how they maneuver on the maps. This is just so you can actually see what happened in the battles.